Hi everyone, my name is Nwenna Kai Gates. Welcome to the Adjunct Success Initiative Project. This is a media project all for adjuncts to learn more about the resources here at the college. And I'm the founder of the project as well as I teach English part-time here at CCP. So today our guest is Anyawile Love, an assistant professor here in the history department. So welcome.
Thank you.
So you have a very interesting story about being a student here at CCP
Yes.
as well as coming to teach at CCP. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I was a non-traditional student when I came here. I enrolled, I was about 27, 28 years old.
Okay.
I had been out of high school for a while, so this was the first time I started college. And at the time I thought I was going to go, I was just get a job as a paralegal and then eventually maybe go to law school. I had a daughter and I was trying to think of what was the best decision career-wise that would start allowing me to make some serious income and take care of my daughter, but then maybe keep going to school. And so that's what I was doing initially. And then I met someone, Dr. Carr. I met him in Knoxville, Tennessee at actually Alex Haley's farm as part of a Freedom School program.
Okay.
I didn't know him, but he was just talking all this black stuff and talking about black history. And he was, you know, the audience was enthralled with him. And I went up to him and introduced myself. And he told me, I told him when I was trying to impress him, like, hey, I want to go to law school. He's like, well, I have my law degree, I have my JD, but everything in life that I've actually done that I feel accomplished with is, you know, get my PhD in Black Studies because it allows me to teach, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't know you could get a PhD in Black Studies, let alone, you know, have a career teaching it. And so I changed my career trajectory literally almost after that conversation. And when I came back here after I graduated, I was in liberal arts here, and part of the dual admissions with Temple. And Temple had a Black Studies program, African American Studies program. And so when I went there, technically I guess as a junior, I entered into the African American Studies program. And got my degree there, and then I stayed for my master's and my PhD, both as well as in African American Studies.
Okay.
Yeah, and and then I did my postdoc. I did a postdoc at Penn State, main campus, Happy Valley, for a year while trying to find a job in, you know, in the university and the academy.
And then you came to teaching at CCP.
Yes.
How?
My wife was still here with our daughter and our son, and I was in Atlanta writing curriculum and teaching at a district out there. And a professor of mine, Dr. Jackie Akins, who was a professor here, she just retired last year. She was my first professor while I was a student here, and we had stayed in contact. And so she reached out to me and told me she was retiring. She was like, it'd be good if you consider applying here. I had applied maybe a year or two before, didn't hear anything back, but she said there's another line open up, and it'd be good if you apply to, you know, hiring for assistant professors in the history department. And so I applied and I went through the whole process, and I was hired at the end of it all.
So I want to talk a little bit about your approach to teaching, your teaching philosophy. I know you teach African American studies. And specifically, I'm interested in like how you teach the Great Migration, right?
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so like for Black History Month, you know, the theme for Asala was the Great Migration.
Yeah.
So what is your approach? How do you?
Yeah, I mean, I love teaching the Great Migration. Interesting enough, next year, 2020 will be the 50th anniversary of the end of the Great Migration, you know?
Interesting.
I'm a product of it, not that I was a part of it, but my grandmother ended up in the North because of that same thing. My approach, well, I'll say this. Part of my approach to teaching anything about Black culture, Black history, and the way I was trained within Black studies is to not create a pathology of Black lives, right? And to lead with the narratives of who Black folk were during these different periods in American history. And so when you look at what is happening during that period, after the period of Reconstruction, of course, or during the period of Reconstruction, which Du Bois calls a splendid failure, all that they could have done for Black folk and for this nation, it ended up not doing.
Right.
You know, because Johnson and Congress and his administration and these things pushing back against the necessity of kind of reacclimating Black folk and equalizing the playing field.
Sure.
And after a while, I mean, how do you fight Jim Crow, and Jim Crow being a state-sanctioned thing? How do you fight that? Well, you just look for opportunities elsewhere. And so the North and Midwest and the West Coast showed promise for Black lives, you know, and other disciplines. They talk about these push-pull factors, things that push people out of places and things that kind of, you know, pull people in. And so it's the same thing with the Great Migration. I mean, Black folk had enough, and they realized, you know, the states are not going to protect us in the South. They're not going to protect our lives, they're not going to protect our children. We don't have, you know, We don't have the protections of the 14th Amendment, all of these things,
Sure.
you know. And so they begin to leave en masse, right? And Du Bois talks about it in Black Reconstruction, you know. Black folk begin to leave and flee the South. And enough of that history is not taught that within this nation, you had this great exodus of people leaving one part of this nation in hopes of a better life. And not just economics, but just the idea of we'll be able to stay alive. I mean, that's just a human instinct, right? You know? And so my approach to it is to kind of lay the foundation of what were the experiences of Black folk during this period that would force them to go to other places, and what hopes did they still have in this nation that across the Mason-Dixon or somewhere on the West Coast, life would be better for them, you know? And then who were those vanguards that said, okay, we'll go first and we'll send word back. And also, it's important to note that this state-sanctioned violence that happened against Black folk for this economic disparity, educational disparities, is what also wanted the South. A lot of people, we understand that, okay, it was an economic reason to keep Black folk in the South because it was almost still free labor after slavery, you know? But the other reason was it was a knock against the narrative that was being told about Black folk that they weren't intelligent people and they couldn't govern themselves. So if you have people leaving the South and then going to parts of the North or wherever in this nation outside of the South and they are making do for themselves, then it goes against the narrative that these are people who couldn't do anything unless they were up under, you know, the oppressor, you know? And so it's important to kind of, for me, to tell that whole narrative to my students. And interesting enough, for a lot of them just to understand how you probably ended up here, you know? And for, you know, when I started teaching, it was still students who were closer to my age, like why you had to go down south to your family reunions and most of your family was still in the South, you know? Or why you have second cousins who came up here because your other cousins probably came first and say, hey, there's jobs here. You know? Or for my grandmother, she went to Atlantic City because that's where the jobs were at. When she first came from Georgia, the jobs were in Atlantic City. You know, they could work in the homes or they could work in the casinos in these places. And then she moved to Philadelphia for the manufacturing jobs. You know, and so you can kind of understand a large part of America's history looking at the Great Migration. And of course, Isabel Wilkerson writes The Warmth of Other Suns, where she explores these several different lives of individuals and their families and how they left the South. I use August Wilson's plays to teach the Great Migration. Joe Turner's Come and Gone, in particular, where you have this individual who's looking for his family, you know, directly after enslavement. And also, what were the hopes of Black folk right after enslavement? You know, some of these things would trickle out into the Great Migration as well. And so my approach is that to kind of tell the narratives from Black folk as full human beings and what were their experiences in spite of or because of the atrocities that they experienced in the South.
So one thing, I've taught an African American experience class, not here, but at Lincoln University. It's one of those classes that supposedly everybody can teach. I'm not trained as a historian, but well versed in African American history. But one thing I always had, or a challenge I had in teaching students, was to teach it not from a perspective of so much struggle and trauma. Not to sort of minimize it, but just because that it creates this pathology. But I don't know, what challenges do you have? How do you address that? Because it's one thing I have an issue with Black History Month all the time, especially when it's taught to your children in schools. It's like, can we not teach this
same seven things?
Can we not keep inducing the trauma?
I think being trained in Black studies, and you know, it forced us to examine how we learn things about Black folk. And usually the default with Black folk is a pathology. There's something wrong with you and it needs to be fixed. And unfortunately, there's a lot of money in Black pathology. So you have a lot of folks still walking around. We was talking about Obama and the speech he gave a couple weeks ago in my class this week, you know, still telling Black boys to pull their pants up. So there's a lot of money in kind of policing Black folk that way. The way I was trained and the way that the folk who trained me was slavery, for instance, is we had a 24-hour clock. It's about 5 minutes in the history of Black folk. It takes up about 90% of the conversation. So then our responsibility is, okay, who were Black people before the episodic challenges of enslavement? Like, what were their lives? What were their experiences? And you go back as far as you can. You know, you can go back to Egypt and say, okay, what were the philosophies and theories of Black folk during this period? And then you can look at the migrations coming out of Egypt and going, through the Nile Valley and these places. Then you can
Right.
go to who were black folk in Ghana, who, in all these places.
Yeah.
There's so much stuff there to discuss. Unfortunately, we focus on kind of one part. Black folk were slaves. They got put on boats. They came here.
Right.
They screamed, "Oh my God!" They were free. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Obama.
Right.
It's just like
Right.
as though it's a straight line to those
Right.
things. And even with that, there's no narrative.
Sure.
And so I don't teach pathology.
Okay.
I don't. My departure is not that there's something wrong with black people that needs to be fixed.
Okay.
My departure is not that black folk were longing to be saved in
Yeah.
any form or fashion.
Right.
Clearly not before enslavement.
Right.
They're just part of the human conversation in their own ways.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't teach that black folk are extraordinary because of these things either, because
Right.
then that creates this other mythic thing of we were all king and
yeah.
queens,
Right,
which
right.
you have to kind of debunk in your class as well, because
Sure.
well, we were all kings and queens, and who were we ruling,
Right.
But I get that. When you have so much pathology, you want to be way beyond what people said you were, and so
Right.
you kind of exaggerate it to the other end. John Henry Clark, who was a mentor to Malcolm X, he said, any group of people who begin a history with slavery, everything after that seems like an accomplishment. And so
Yes.
my students are befuddled when we don't start the class off with slavery, and we're talking about like ancient Egypt and what were their ways of knowing and being, and then we eventually get to slavery, but we spend a little bit of time on that. And we more so talk about white supremacy and capitalism and the rise of Western powers out of Europe and all these things, to kind of put it into context. And you can't tell that story without talking about Europe's relationship with native nations when they first arrived here, be it the Spanish or the Portuguese or the English when they come into the, Virginia and these places. So we do it like that. We tell it on the other side,
Okay.
Not that I approach it like Howard Zinn, who tells it from the people's point of view, but to some degree, who are the people whose voices we've never heard? What do you think they had to say? Because the materials are out there.
Okay.
Our responsibility as historians is to do the work to teach that. You
Sure.
can unfortunately be lazy and get used to teaching the same things and not
Okay.
challenge yourself or your classes, or you could do the work of people who've done the work, because the work has already been done.
Right.
You go find those materials and introduce them to your students. So that's my general approach. And I tell them, if you think it's going to be this, you could probably drop my class today because it's not going to be that. I tell them they're going to be uncomfortable because they may be learning some things. I don't do it for shock value, but you're
Right.
going to definitely learn some things that maybe you weren't taught K through 12.
Okay.
And there's going to be some truths that you've held on to that may not be your truths.
Wow.
Um,
Can you speak to any of those truths that maybe students bring up in class? I know that's probably a big
Yeah.
question. that
when we talk about Christopher Columbus,
Okay.
I teach a history 101, which is like American history. And when we talk about Christopher Columbus, I center it on what does it say about a nation to have a holiday from a person who committed genocide,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And when we talk about Pocahontas,
Okay.
because they've all seen the Disney movie,
Right.
and they can't believe she was 14 years old and she was kidnapped by
Right.
this man, and, just those type of things. When we get to the topic of the African sell other Africans into slavery, and I always compare it to other groups of people who were harshly treated. You never really blame those people. There's some
Right.
people within those groups who did harsh things to their own folk,
Right.
but you don't hold them responsible for the entire genocide,
Right.
And so because they've all, African soldiers, yeah, but let's like peel back the layers of what African slavery looked like. It
Right.
wasn't this death sentence. It wasn't
Right. It wasn't
biologically,
dehumanizing
it wasn't
it, yeah.
dehumanizing, these type of things. So, but it's hard to not, because the thing is, as a teacher, you have this artificial power.
Yeah.
When you have a desk in between you and the student, you think whatever you're saying is probably true.
That's right.
And so if you've heard the same things for 12 years or even
Right.
longer, because there's unfortunately professors in the academy who are teaching the same stuff and regurgitating those same things, you hold it as truth, know,
Okay.
and it's difficult sometimes to. I've had students challenge me, bring family members to class, but I don't think
Really?
yeah, I mean, and I don't mind because I feel like there
Right.
should be a space, a civil space for those type of
Sure.
things. And I mean, we're trained, so I can back up the things. And it's not about challenging folk,
Yeah.
but I think it also helps. It makes me think, okay, well, you cared enough to even make sure these things were true,
Right.
which is what you want students to do.
Right.
But it also makes me say, hey, whatever I say, I need to make sure I can back it up. Not that I would just talk something off the side of my
Right.
mouth, but just to make sure I can back it up.
Okay.
Yeah.
What types of classes would you like to
Oh.
see here at CCP that we don't have currently?
A whole lot. No.
Okay. 'Cause can I tell you something?
Yes.
So, like, I went to Louisiana like a year ago and learned all about the slavery in Louisiana and how different it
Yeah,
was. And it was
yeah.
just a piece of history that I had never
Yeah,
gotten before. And I was
yeah.
like, wow, people need to know, I mean, the slavery, the laws were different.
Yeah, the Congo Square.
Yeah, they
and all
were.
these places, yeah.
But I was like, we need a class just on that.
You do, you do. I mean, the good thing is, and I guess it's public knowledge now, the Black Studies degree has been approved. So
Right.
it'll open up more spaces for those courses.
types of courses.
A big part of my dissertation was on African creation narratives, and so I look at the Congo,
Okay.
and on John Coltrane. So I would love to teach a course on Black music. I would love to teach a course on African philosophy and theories,
Wow.
African folklore. I would love to see a course like that. I mean, I can give you the litany. I would love to teach a course on Black men, on Black women. I would love to teach a course on mass communications in the Black community.
Wow.
I'm thinking of all the classes that benefited me as a Black studies student.
Right.
And again, I mean, it must be understood that Black history as a course is separate from Black studies as a discipline. So Black studies is not Black history. Black studies is like any other discipline, right? It has its own theories and paradigms, and it has all of these different courses that you could take or ways that you can examine things. It's just your departures through the ways in which Black folks saw the world and understood the world, their own philosophies, But if someone say, hey, what class would you like to teach in the fall? I would probably say history of Black music, because I feel like there's so much in that, or history of African music, there's so much in that where you can explain religious beliefs, intergenerational training, apprenticeship, coded language, so there's so much that you can teach within that, but definitely in terms of Black, or I would love to teach an African religion course, and demystify voodoo and demystify Ifa, for students. That's another thing, going back to one of the other questions. The scariest part when we start having discussions about Black religion, African religion, and we start talking about voodoo and these things, because they've been so they've such a pathology behind them that folk are even scared to talk about them. So I've had students leave like, I can't talk about that, which is okay, you can leave. Still read the material.
Right.
You're still responsible for the material.
Wow.
But they don't want to talk about voodoo because of the way they've received it,
Right.
or the films that they've seen and what they know about Haiti. But when you start talking about Haiti as the first African nation to gain its independence, and you bring Napoleon in there, and you start talking about the Louisiana, speaking of Louisiana Purchase, and this is how they got it, and all these other things, then you start making more context of this place that we don't know anything about, but we think we know everything about in terms of Haiti and these other places.
Wow, that's powerful. So why is it that people always say the reason why we should study history is so that we don't repeat it? Like, what is that about? Because it's not true.
Well, I think Clark said it's like a compass, right?
Okay.
It kind of gives us direction.
Okay.
Malcolm X would say, of all of our studies, history is best prepared to reward our efforts.
Okay.
And so we have no control over what things can be repeated.
Sure.
But we at least know they're approaching. So history gives us experience, and it's the great thing about studying history is you gain experience from having not experienced it yourself, right? So as adults, we can see when children are making certain mistakes because we went through it.
Right.
History is like, hey, this thing is probably going to happen again.
Right.
And so we don't get. So if you study history, then you don't get too excited when Barack Obama, for instance, gets elected as president. You're like, okay, well, then America's still this. And so, if you study history, it kind of allows you to know, to anticipate certain things as well. You can't completely stop those things. So I agree with you. It will repeat itself, but things come around the circle anyway. And it's just like, what do you take with you to go forward, and what do you discard to go forward? So. I think it's more like that, and kind of like what you were saying about Black History Month, right? So we understood what Black History Month was really about. We're here to discuss everything we did from the year before,
right?
Not just the 12 Black people that did something for the first time ever in Black history,
Right.
So, but if you study history, then you understand what Carter G. Woodson's purpose of Black History Month was about, or Negro History Week was about,
right?
And so you're not overly upset when people have been saying this year, Black History Month is canceled because of all the crazy stuff that's just been happening this month. You say, okay, well, no, we take that and we examine that throughout the year. So next year, if these things happen again, we're not pushed back too far. We can keep moving towards a place that we want to arrive at, you know, as opposed to saying, oh, well, they took away our Black History Month took it away because this, and what ain't what Black History Month is about, you know? And unless you thought I wait till February to start talking about Black stuff, then it is about that. But if you know what Carter G. Woodson said, no study, consequently no celebration. In other words, if y'all ain't study all year, why y'all celebrating this month or this week? This week is supposed to be like, hey, this is all the great things we did over the year. Let's honor those things and talk about what we're going to do the following year. But if you ain't done nothing, then maybe don't celebrate it this year.
Right.
Maybe just talk about why you ain't do nothing, you know?
Right,
So
right.
I think that's how history helps us because it gives us kind of that experience without having experienced it ourselves. But it allows us to prepare for those next movements or those next major waves that will come our way.
Okay. Okay, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was really insightful.
Thank you.
So thank you everybody for joining us with the Adjunct Success Initiative, and we will see you next time with our next guest. Take care. Bye-bye.